education learners. My name is Lindy, and I'm the Academic Upgrading Coordinator at Northern Lights College, and I'm based up in Slave Lake. This session today will briefly share Photostory research that came from programming at Northern Lights College. We'll explore the barriers and best practices adult basic education learners face and connect it to effective online programming. And though this is about adult basic education learners and an adult basic education program, the presentation should really be called Why We Need Universal Design for Learning. So we need to start with narrative. In this story, as with my research, I use a research perspective that places me in the narrative. So if you're familiar with Indigenous research practices, feminist research practices, because it really is about our point of view, from how far away or close up we are to ourselves and to our learner. And it influences our perspective as administrators, developers, teachers, and learners. Before I was a teacher, I worked with adults with disabilities, and I was at a North American Consortium on Persons with Disabilities in Hermosillo, Mexico. And I saw there that advocacy connected to accessibility. So this is where I first learned about universal design as they're applied to the physical environments. Like it did to those I supported back home in Calgary, like this lovely lady who I'm guardian to. Again, I saw advocacy and having a voice was extremely important. And this is the main purpose of my research. It's to find accessibility, that our online learning is available universally to all students at all levels. Online distance learning is here. On the one hand, it can remove barriers and increase access, but I was hearing anytime, anywhere resources in courses without any reference to the teacher, the pedagogy, or the learner. It was as if online learning was the panacea or magic bullet for all students. Much of the research is based on higher level learners, and I wanted to find out if we're meeting students who are at the basic education level where they're at. What kinds of different program planning should we be taking into consideration? And what are the best practices for students at the pre-high school level? So I looked to our college, which as you can see is pretty used to accommodating distances. We have 18 campuses located in a region almost the size of Florida. We have campuses on First Nations reserves, Métis settlements, and in towns and villages scattered along the way. So we've been doing some form of distance delivery, be it telephone or correspondence, since 1971. That leads me to our basic education program, or our BEL, or basic education level courses. The students in our adult basic education program, average age is 29 years, with 85% identifying of having First Nations heritage. Many of our students are parents, 32% are male, 67% are female. Our adult basic education classes have been online starting in 2010. There was a choice of face-to-face instruction or online at that time. We have 2 new courses coming online this upcoming term. And by September, I believe, all of our courses from Basic Education Level 1 all the way to Basic Education Level 3 will be online. So for ABE, we have 3 levels of courses at the Basic Education level. BEL 101, sorry, don't know what I did. BEL 101 is approximately grades 4 to 5. BEL 201 is approximately grades 6 to 7. BEL 301 approximately grades 8 to 9. So we offer it in 2 terms, 1 course per term. They're 5 months in length. We do use Blackboard Collaborate for online delivery and Moodle for our learning management system. So each course is 2 grade levels completed in 5 months. This is my son Oliver, who's 3 1/2. half. So if you compare him to a student completing 4 grades in 10 months, if I started Oliver in school when he was 6 months old, he would have graduated this year. That's why we need universal design for learning. To connect to the perspective of our students, I was inspired by the qualitative research that helped underrepresented learners find a voice. Again, it was in that praxis of location and narrative. I got volunteers to take pictures that would capture the barriers and best practices they faced, either as a learner or as someone who supported our adult basic learners or someone who taught them. It was a year of participatory action research that started with those who supported the learners in phase 1. And I had 5 participants. And then phase 2 included 22 students, instructors, and administrators. So I thought, let's examine what works and doesn't work to honor the whole learner. And it will reveal what's lost in translation, because adult basic education is traditionally taught face-to-face, and moving it online has been new for our college as well for other institutions provincially. This particular picture is from a participant. It represents the issue of a second language. So many of our learners are EAL, they're Cree or Dene speakers, and then we have ESL as well. English isn't the primary language, but we also have to remember there's that translation from on-site to online. For the EAL or ESL learner, there needs to be a lot of explicit teaching. We can't assume about prior knowledge. There's issues like vocabulary, breaking down of content and concepts into small parts, and keeping instructions down to 1 or 2 steps. So the multi-level instructions that we're used to, especially when we're looking at learning management systems, don't necessarily work very well for our students. It's even more difficult when you don't have the visual or physical clues of a student not understanding. Students at this level have low self-efficacy. They're not going to raise their hand in class. They're certainly not going to bring attention to themselves online. So given that you can't visually see your students, how can you optimize the learning environment? Give them a face and a voice. Post photos of yourself and your students. Always start with some community building. Create community building within the classes. With us, we do have couriers that go to different campuses. So I, as an online instructor, have sent students things like little thank you cards, or as well as connecting with them online, trying to connect to them through video, trying to connect to them through text, trying to connect to them through Facebook. So that wasn't me, that was another instructor. But whatever we can to create those connections with the students is what's extremely important. We try and speak to each student individually more than once per class, so saying their name. Knowing where the students are, so trying to get a sense of the room dynamics. What are they coping with? Some students are alone in a room, some students are around a computer. There might be 6 or 7 students, so there's only one person who's in charge of the mic, who's in charge of the mouse, who's typing in the chat. So what's happening to those other 6 students in that room? My most beneficial moments have been when I was able to walk around and sit in on distance classes and see the responses to the instructors by the students. So if an instructor is saying to them, okay, turn to page 16 and then read the first paragraph, I could see the frustration of students while the instructor kept talking. So that inability to see visually that the students are actually doing this, and maybe I shouldn't be saying anything while they're actually following instructions, that disconnect is really important to be aware of. So wait time, a lot of it, especially with students who are at a lower level and whose cognitive overload is pretty high, especially at first. They don't have digital literacy skills. They don't have academic skills. There's a lot of social and online interactive skills that they don't have. So trying to get right into the content and getting them to interact is very difficult. Review and repetition, show information in a variety of ways, so using video slides, connecting by pictures and stories. There's a really great movement happening right now for the integration of stories, and it's so simple. Rather than giving a PowerPoint of 3 pictures of this is how you do fractions, you connect the fractions to an authentic experience. We talk about that a lot when we look at curriculum, but when people get online, I find sometimes lectures the default. And figuring out how do I translate what I know works really well in a face-to-face classroom into an online classroom is really difficult sometimes. We want to encourage the use of online interactions with emoticons, the microphone, or the chat. If you're familiar with Blackboard Collaborate, I'll have them put up their hand, and then another time I'll have them give me a round of applause, and another time we'll use a green check mark. So it's really mixing it up, so you know that they're paying attention, as well as getting to comfortable with all of those tools. Watch pronunciation and speed. That's something I tell a lot of new instructors is listen to those who do it well. So for instance, somebody who's a radio personality who talks. How do they keep your attention? What's their rhythm like? What's their pace? What do they do when they transition? Somebody who's an expert at it, listen to it. And then record yourself with your classes and listen back. And that is the greatest teaching tool. So this comes from the Photostory project. I love this picture. What we ask of basic education students is very foreign, and we come with the assumption that they know a lot of this. They've had prior knowledge with and experience with computers. And one instructor said, it's like showing them a screen of wingdings or hieroglyphics. That's what it looks like to our students. Put them in a Moodle, and that's what it looks like. We think we have really great curriculum design, and we have really great formatting in our Moodle courses, but I've sat with students who've gone at it for the first time, and it really is like Greek to them. They have no idea how to follow through. Just look at what happened in phase 1 of the project. It was all professionals who supported the students. No one questioned the technology we used, which was disposable cameras for ethical reasons, and we were at a distance and all that kind of thing. So it was assumed by me that everyone knew how to use them. How hard could it be? It's an old school device. It's a digital camera. Every participant, including myself, got many grainy and dark images. It didn't click that we needed to use the flash. I loved it. When they came back, I laughed so hard because I thought, what irony, how does that parallel what actually happens to our students? Here you go, use it. We walk away. And though online learning does provide increased access, like being able to log in from home, decision-making about how courses are developed, and the resources and activities needs to be approached with caution. Many students at the basic education level have low income. They might have no access to an internet. Most will not own a computer. So asking them to do all their work online, when can they do it? This is for us with our students at our campus. Their sporadic schooling means they never really learn computer literacy because there's no separate computer courses anymore. It's integrated into K-12. So if they have very sporadic schooling experience, they didn't get that K-6 level. So even though we say they're at a grade 6 level, there's huge gaps in their prior knowledge and their learning. And one of the weirdest is the assumption that use of a smartphone and Facebook equals digital literacy. If a student can use a smartphone, somehow they can succeed in an online course. And that's what I'm hoping that this kind of research and presentations and advocacy can do is recognize that it is a whole different set of skills. Computer literacy, it goes back to perspective and listening to the stories of the learners. So somebody developing an online course comes at it with a very different worldview and very different experience. So for me, to open the assignment by clicking here, the file will be open in Microsoft Word, type your name at the top of the file in the area provided, save your file, all of these things without explicit instruction, scaffolding, showing them how to do it, taking them through it step by step, completely foreign to them. So many of the courses say type this in. They don't know anything about a keyboard. I've had students, they don't know what the shift key is, and they were high school students. It goes back to perspective. For some, the path ends here, and for some, it changes into a skidoo trail. And I love that. This instructor was having such a hard time with the cultural and the isolation and the online learning, and by the end of our project, this was her last picture, and it was her epiphany. So the reasons why our students didn't succeed in the school system is primary. We need to recognize that and make our programming flexible, which is really difficult to do when we're governed by funding and government mandates. But they have gaps in education, negative experiences, learning disabilities, family circumstances, poverty, addictions, teen parenting. Somebody said, oh, well, once our K-12 school system gets fixed, we won't need our basic education system. And somebody said, yeah, if there's no teen pregnancy and no such thing as addictions anymore. And, you know, those of us who've worked with basic education students, it's very common sense. So for me, sometimes it takes me by surprise with some of the mythology out there. And our students are on this journey, so they bring their baggage with them, and they're dealing with baggage in their personal life as well. So instructors really need to be aware of that. Transportation issues, childcare issues. There is a prize at the end of the road, but it's really hard for them to see it sometimes. Speaks to transition programming and orientation and community building. So I often wonder how effective is it for us to do a 1-hour introduction to Collaborate when they start their courses, and then it's see ya, there you go. So we need to look at transition programming that's extensive, explicit, hands-on, and repetitive that we're doing all the way throughout our term. So we do quite a few different pieces of orientation and try and build it in. Our instructors are really good at trying to build in proactive assessments and things like that in their introductory assignments. And then we try and do some student engagement throughout the year, so we call them student development sessions. And it's creating that sense of community engagement. As anybody knows who's looked at the research, a student who feels engaged and connected to their community and their curriculum, they're going to stick through it when they're running through hard times, and the attrition rate isn't as high. Transition programming means never assume. Our students don't even know how to use a photocopier, and we get them to scan to email a lot of their assignments. And even talking on a phone. So what we've done is some of our instructors, in their pre-course assignment or their first introductory assignment, they have a script, and the student has to call them and answer these questions in the script. So it forces them. It's like when somebody's in a crisis with a mental health issue, and you say, oh, we'll go call the helpline, chances are they're not going to. But if you sit with them and say, let's call them up together, then it has more impact. So it's making somebody have that connection and facing that fear head on. The student, I love this, she hated online learning, but she said you have to learn how to learn online. And you have to be like the lizard and learn to adapt. Where we are for scaffolding and support. One teacher said, get the student to learn how to put their head underwater first before you throw them in the deep end. And she's from Nova Scotia, so she had a lot of seafaring kind of metaphors and images. But it goes back to recognizing that there's so many various literacies that are involved. And I think that's often forgotten when we start looking at standardization and online practices without the proper training. And that's another piece to this, that's another theme, is that training. We say to an instructor, okay, you're teaching online, here's how you push the buttons. But the bigger piece is how do you connect to the students and how do you use all of the tools. So you lose a lot online as opposed to face-to-face. That visual picture, seeing it drawn on the board, that kinesthetic piece is gone, some of the immediacy, and that's what a lot of the students struggled with in this project. But all the students involved said they wouldn't be able to succeed without the on-site facilitator or teacher. So in every campus we have an on-site facilitator that takes attendance, and for those who are funded, they're there to help with tutoring. They're often the counselor, because we have a counselor, but they only come into the campus once a week. It speaks volumes towards the need for some kind of blended model. When you're looking at students at a basic education level, one of the teachers called it doing the rounds. And it connects to Grove's model, which is stage 1, where adult basic education students arrive. They're really dependent learners, and we have this idea of the Knowles adult learning, the andragogy, but we forget the reality of our students. And again, it's applying theory on a reality that doesn't quite fit. So at this stage, they require an authority figure to tell them what to do. And you notice that in your instruction as well. They just want you to give them the answer and fill in the blanks. They don't want to give an opinion. They don't want to summarize. A lot of times they don't know how to. That abstract thinking isn't there. Our on-site instructors know when our students are facing grief or crisis. In our First Nations communities, it's not unusual for a student to go through multiple traumas with funerals or deaths. I had a student that started with me this year. In 2 weeks, she went through 4 funerals, and that's how she started her term. Now, if I wasn't aware that it affected her short-term memory and that I wasn't going to get her to recite and memorize, and it was going to affect her her ability to keep up with the work, you know, she may have lost her funding because of lack of academic performance. Obviously, community and worldview connects back to perspective. So we need to ultimately recognize that it's a different type of learning. So I kind of call it scratch and sniff education. You can't quite smell it, but we do what we can. Actually, you've got those scratch and sniff stickers, but I couldn't find them. But I think what's really important to advocate for is that the tools are not the learner. So yes, there's a lot of possibilities and accessibility, and there's a lot of things that we can do with our learners through technology, but the tools are not the learner, and they sometimes get forgotten in the conversation. The tools are a means to achieve learner-centered success. Because after all, at the other end of the virtual superhighway is a person. A smelling, smelly, noisy, silent, unconsciously vibrating, smiling, nodding, frowning, yawning, feeling student who brings a myriad of experiences, prior knowledge, baggage, barriers, strengths, and interpersonal needs. And I love this quote. Teaching properly conceived is not a delivery system. You know you're not just there to pass on received information. Great teachers do that, but what great teachers also do is mentor, stimulate, provoke, and engage. So to conclude, translating pedagogy online requires a reinvention of strategy, reaching all learners universally. It requires perspective and creativity, respecting worldviews, experiences. It means programming needs to be intentional and flexible. So thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been fun.